Thank you, Jennifer. And I want to apologize on behalf of Pat. We had a last minute change, but as Jennifer said, I'm Jennifer Codo-Salisbury. I'm the Deputy Director of the Central Florida Regional Planning Council. I've been with the council about 14 years now, and my job is to work in partnership with our local governments. And of course, we administer a diversity of programs throughout the region. And currently working in partnership with our communities on the Heartland Regional Resiliency Coalition. So on that note, if we can go to the next slide. So I wanted to take a moment. When you look at this slide, you can see the state of Florida and where the Heartland is. And we are the only region in the state that doesn't have a coastal county. The Central Florida Regional Planning Council is composed of the 5 northern counties shown here, and that includes Polk, Hardy, Highlands, Okeechobee, and DeSoto. And again, we are the only regional planning council without a coastal county. And then in addition, as part of the Heartland, we include Glades and Hendry. And as we look at the Heartland, just for a little bit of perspective, approximately 1 million people live in the Heartland. That is of 2020, and that's almost 5% of the state's population. We're home to the Green Swamp, area of critical state concern, at least the southern part of the Green Swamp. Also the headwaters for the Everglades, Lake Okeechobee, and of course the Kissimmee River and Peace River basins. Next slide. So Heartland 2060 is a grassroots effort that was formed back in 2007, and the region was experiencing a tremendous amount of growth, and we really looked at the path that we were on out to 2060. And of course, the Heartland had more vacant land, agricultural lands, and certainly environmental and natural resources. But the communities in the Heartland came together at that time to acknowledge this and really look forward to a path to the future that would really recognize the community's values and goals. Next slide. So as the grassroots effort started off with Heartland 2060, we had formed task forces, which included education, workforce, and economic development, as well as environment and natural resources, transportation and land use, and community resources. As we really looked at, in the region, our shared assets, really our interrelatedness, and then going forward, our values. Next slide. So through Heartland 2060 and the visioning efforts, the core values of the Heartland were identified, which included stewardship of natural resources, our water resources, and next slide. Respect for agriculture, and also our communities. Next slide. All of these values propel us forward with the goal of the future for our children, to have a viable and resilient future for them, a place where they can receive an education, receive employment, and personal development, a reason to, if you leave the Heartland, to come back, and if you're here, to stay. Next slide. So through the Heartland core values, those values have really guided our communities in our region and all of our work in supporting consensus building, development of plans and programs, and the support of existing and new initiatives, and continued conversations. Next slide. And this engagement has really continued since 2007. Recently, we did a Heartland 2060 update, which we'll talk about in a minute, but a lot of Heartland 2060 is data-driven as we look at our population projections and a number of other things. But as our stakeholders reconvened, the biggest message that was heard was that we need to continue to collaborate. Heartland 2060 has brought a lot to the table, but the most significant aspect is the collaboration of the many communities, stakeholders, agencies. Next slide. So under the umbrella of Heartland 2060, we have a kind of a data-driven foundation, which we work to continuously keep updated. And that includes population, economy, education, agriculture, environment and natural systems, energy, transportation, and community sustainability. Some of the collaboratives that have been formed are starting to pull that information together, and some are well established as far as that information. And we're more on the side of having that foundation in place with that data. Next slide. So the Heartland 2060 platform has really taken us to the next step as we look at resiliency in our Heartland communities with respect to natural disaster threats. That includes flooding, wind damage, and extreme weather, and these threats and their impacts to our infrastructure, agriculture, essential buildings, housing, community assets, and military installations. We do have the Avon Park Air Force Range within our region, and just acknowledging that that inland does also receive impacts from these natural disaster threats. And I believe in this legislative session, when we look at resiliency, I think the legislature has kind of put the coastal communities and inland communities as being recognized as both experiencing these types of threats. Next slide. So as we look at the climate and resilience collaboratives that have formed across Florida, I think this slide's a good example of how we are the first completely inland collaborative or coalition. And as part of Heartland, we have always worked with our neighbors and would continue that and working with the neighboring regions and across the state. Next slide. So as we look at the Heartland and through Heartland 2060, we really have continued to identify how interconnected we are through our economies, our natural resources, and also the vulnerabilities that we share. But then also that continuity among the different organizations and efforts, including transportation, natural resources, and also, of course, the work with the Coastal and Heartland National Estuary Partnership as well. And that includes the Peace River Basin and the Kissimmee River Basin. And of course, a lot of what happens in the Heartland impacts other regions, and the Green Swamp, of course, is headwaters to 4 of the major rivers, and of course, impacts to the Peace River to the north where we are certainly can impact further down. So we certainly acknowledge that as we move forward. Next slide. So in September of 2021, the Central Florida Regional Planning Council had approved moving forward to work with the Heartland to form the Heartland Regional Resiliency Coalition. And this really is a cognizant effort to work together at a regional level to identify opportunities and solutions as we look at regional resiliency and also looking at leveraging resources. The Memorandum of Understanding addresses regional cooperation, which is an effort as we look together, we'll identify vulnerabilities and looking at the effects of weather on our communities, and also looking at common vulnerability assessment methodologies, and also looking at pursuing public-private partnerships. Also having a platform to develop a regional resiliency action plan, and also looking at the role of planning and resiliency, which is significant in bringing together data and science-driven methodologies, and then looking together to look at our regional vulnerabilities and taking a regional approach to looking at and leveraging funding strategies. And overall, engaging the Heartland community for working together for a more resilient future. Next slide. So on that note, just wanted to end on the Heartland Regional Resiliency Coalition is effective. The Memorandum of Understanding has gone into effect as of April 1st, 2022. And we are very excited about that as we work with our communities and partners and stakeholders as we move forward to continue to work towards a more resilient region. Thank you. I see the first questions. Is there one element of vulnerability or risk that stands out for the Heartland that differs from the coast? We have seen flooding in our region and wind damage, and I don't know that any stand out more. We definitely are susceptible to flooding and wind damage and temperature changes, which also impact agriculture as well. I remember in 2004, during the 3 hurricanes that came right into the Heartland, we had quite a bit of flooding in our region. Did all of the counties and cities sign the MOU? The majority of the counties have or are scheduled to. We're on their agendas, and the cities are moving forward as well in signing the MOU. I haven't heard from anyone who wasn't wanting to sign on. Are the inland counties preparing for future mitigation from coastal or migration from coastal counties? That has definitely been discussed and will be considered. And then are the solar and wind power resources, companies, government agencies included in the Resiliency Coalition? So we are in the beginnings of the Resiliency Coalition, and we do have the opportunities for other organizations to also sign into the Memorandum of Understanding. And thank you for the congratulations. The Heartland has so much to contribute: climate mitigation, carbon sequestration, but I do not see this as a priority. Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for your comment.